Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Butterfly Effect podcast. I'm Jack. I'm here with my good friend Liam,
Thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here.
and this brand new podcast is all things related to choice-based games. So in future episodes, you can expect us to give reviews about these games, do talk-throughs, which we'll explain later on, and just give a general overview of what our relationship with these games are. So now we've got the stuffy intro out the way, we'll now crack on with it. And this episode is going to be about our personal timelines and relationships with choice-based games, what we've played and what we think of them. So, to begin with, Liam, where did it all start for you?
So I've got my timeline written here in front of me, and the very first game for me was back around about 2005 on the PlayStation 2, a game called Fahrenheit. So I'm pretty sure in this podcast we're probably going to talk a lot about multiple game studios, but the three that'll crop up every now and then are probably going to be Supermassive Games, Telltale. But this one may be my favorite. It's difficult to say because they're quite different and they all have their pros and cons. But Quantic Dream. So Quantic Dream, we all know them for Detroit Become Human. Heavy Rain was a big hit. But they all started back in 2005 with Fahrenheit. So they had a few previous games, but Fahrenheit was the one that I really discovered and took off. So I'm pretty sure it might be the same for you, but a lot of other kids around that age for us would probably be playing shooter games. But Fahrenheit was just so different to me. I've never been quite wrapped up by a game and just pulled in quite like that one. In my opinion, to this day, I probably would argue the strongest intro to a game ever. I don't want to spoil too much, obviously, because, we might do a separate thing on it on its own. But the whole story about the game is you play as a man who gets possessed, and you do a murder in a diner bathroom. And then you get unpossessed, and the opening scene is simply you cleaning up the body, trying to hide it, trying to get rid of all the evidence. And the game's really clever because it's got two shots, one of you cleaning up, and in the other one, there's a policeman in the diner who's getting up to go to the bathroom you're in. And there's tense music, and I've never been so on edge in a video game intro ever, where I had the back of my head, the back of my neck hair standing up, and I was wrapped in. And it's a great game because you play the cops as well as the man, so it's almost like cat and mouse. You play both sides, which I thought was a really interesting take because I've never really had that in a video game. Usually you play the good guys or the bad guys, never both. So, you really had the choice of whether you wanted to be good with the good guy and then bad with the police, maybe. It was very much like that. But yeah, Quantic Dream, as I'm sure you can agree, very good. I think what makes them so good as well is they really take their times with each game. So often their games get released every 5 years, which is probably my biggest criticism of a studio like Telltale, for example. But yeah, 2005 Fahrenheit. And then for me, my next stop is actually in 2010. I don't know if yours is before then or not.
Well, it was, in terms of these games, it started for me probably a year or so later, but I think you're going to talk about Heavy Rain, right? And we played that.
Of course.
So yeah, let's talk about Heavy Rain.
Yeah, brilliantly. So obviously it ties in very nice with Fahrenheit. So it's the same studio. I believe they're French Canadian actually. And 5 years later in 2010 they released Heavy Rain. So honestly, probably above and beyond for me. Graphics better. This was on the next gen of consoles as well. So I say consoles. This was a PlayStation exclusive. They always were. So if you were an Xbox kid, you weren't playing these games. I unfortunately made the switch to 360. So this was one of the biggest downfalls for me, that I actually never got to play Heavy Rain off the bat. I would have to rely on YouTube walkthroughs and playthroughs even of the game because I really wanted to be a part of it instantly. But yeah, I never played it until a mate who owned a PS3 went on holiday, and I took after the house, and I just was straight on the PlayStation every day playing Heavy Rain. But yeah, Heavy Rain's a brilliant crime game where you play as 4 characters. There's a serial killer going around. I believe it's set in Philadelphia. And everything is phenomenal, from the soundtrack to the story to each different scene. It's a very gripping game. It's Fahrenheit above and beyond. And I absolutely fell in love with Quantic Dream at this point, because it's probably at this game where I realized they're not a one-trick pony. They're constantly going to wait 5 years and produce a moment of quality, and then maybe another 5 years, and then there'll be another moment of quality. So yeah, I honestly love Quantic Dream to this day. One of the most consistent game studios that have always been a top 3 game maker for me. And yeah, Heavy Rain really. But yeah, so we're going to go into 2012 now, I presume. And this was interesting because I only thought Quantic Dream at this point were the only game studio that would make games such as this genre. Interactive drama, I believe they're called officially anyway. But yeah, shall I leave you to talk about 2012?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is where my timeline starts, really. I remember it was roughly a decade ago. I went to my friend's house and he sort of showed me, he said, I've been playing this game on my iPad, and it was The Walking Dead. And I remember at the time I sort of saw the front cover and I was sort of, it was comic graphics, and or sort of back then I was sort of more your FIFA and Call of Duty player, and I was looking, I was like, oh, like this doesn't look up to standard. But I sat there and played it, and from the get go I was pulled in. The idea of making dialogue choices, obviously there's a point and click variety to it as well when you're performing actions, and you can walk around and look at objects and stuff like that. And plus at the time, that was the period when zombies were really in their pomp, like across the entertainment industry, like in movies as well. So I really got a kick out of it, actually. I thought the voice acting was solid, the story in general was solid, and at the time this was my introduction to choice-based games. So whereas now that it's obviously grown in sophistication, and you sort of look back at Telltale games and you might think, oh, you know, it's nowhere near as good because you make one choice and it doesn't really matter because the opposite choice occurs later on anyway. But for me at that time, The Walking Dead Series 1 was a very good game, and obviously it's the genre that has stayed with me since, really. And then, of course, there was 400 Days that come out, which I don't remember too much about, apart from this absolutely annoying achievement where you had to play.
I'm aware.
Yeah. You had to play rock, paper, scissors, and you had to win 3 times. And it was the only achievement that I needed. And it was so annoying because it always took you back to a checkpoint that was a little bit far away from that point. So you'd have to play like a 5-minute segment just to get to that point again if you lost.
Same here. I believe that one took me about 4 or 5 tries, and my brother completed it first time, and he wasn't even aware it was a missable trophy. He just got it in one go, and I was absolutely frustrated kicking myself with that one.
Yeah. So, but other than that, I do remember, like, I did enjoy 400 Days. It was a nice addition to sort of the first series of the game. But what did you think of sort of Series 2 when it was obviously, spoiler alert, everyone, Lee dies. You're just playing as Clementine in Series 2. How do you think the game transitioned from that?
So if I was to go back and play a season, because I loved season 1 so much to the point I have played it to death, if I was to go back and play a season, it won't be season 2, because I remembered the least about it, and I do have fond memories with it. I think I hated it a lot less than most people. I think it was just so difficult to be as good as the first one, which really just found a gap in the market and with the genre. Only Quantic Dream were really producing games, but because they were waiting every so often, Telltale really went in there and, you know, like you say, they hopped on the zombie market, and it was such a good game for me as well because I was a big Walking Dead fan when it came out, and you know, both, it's like my favorite game genre and my favorite series at the time just went hand in hand, and I was obsessed. And as we all know, the game's brilliant. You had the great soundtrack, the emotional ending, the choices, which were phenomenal. And that's probably my favorite element about these games, right? That we could both play the same game and then talk about what happened in each other's stories because we knew we'd get a different game. And that's the thing I'm obsessed with about this genre. And when we get to season 2, I guess, it's a very different game, isn't it? In the sense that the first one is about protection and the second one's very much about survival.
Yeah.
I believe a lot of the story had already been written. I believe they missed a trick on a few elements. For example, I would have kept Carver in the game longer. There's a lot of stuff I would have done a little differently. But yeah,
That's right.
like for example, I wanted to explore Luke more. There was a lot of interesting characters who I wanted to see more of. Carver, Luke, Bonnie, I'd say. I felt the 400 Days cast could have been used a little better. I do appreciate 400 Days being the fact that we were so starved after season 1. We just wanted more. So I would take whatever I could get. So 400 Days was such a nice little bonus thing for me. But season 2, I think it gets a bad rap because of how good season 1 was. But I actually really liked season 2 still. And I think when you compare it to season 3, in my opinion, season 2 is very good.
I'd probably go as far as to say that series 2 is my favourite. I think it's perhaps, I like it. What I did find surprised about the ending is how you could get various choices as well.
Of course,
because I think you can end up with Kenny, you can end up on your own, you can end up with Jane, I believe, and obviously all the other various characters are sort of whittled down throughout the series. But I don't know, it felt like there was less moments in this series where the game's momentum slowed down. I remember in sort of series 1, as much as I liked it, there's the segment on the train where it can really sort of slow down, even when you're sort of before you go to the cannibals in episode 2.
Oh yeah, the amount of times walking around a farm.
yeah, it can really. But so I think they got the pacing right in series 2, and as far as series 3 is when you play as Javier, right? Like as a completely new character, I think.
Season 3, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't remember too much about that series. I know Clementine is in it, but it's sort of more of a bit part player. It's more focused on Javier and his family and stuff. And I think this is the point when the graphics improved a bit. I remember thinking at the time, yeah, they've sort of taken more time. The colours looked bolder. Even the movement mechanics of the zombies looked better, and the whole game just all round a little bit better. And then there was the final season, which again I've only played once, so there's only sort of a few details I remember. What did you sort of think of series 3 and 4? Was there anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, so with season 3, although I would argue it is the worst one, perhaps because we're given this other main character who, in my opinion, I care very little about. He was just kind of sprung on. We're all diehard Clementine fans. However, I would admit that if they was to do a series similar to 1 and 2, it might have been very stale, and I do appreciate they tried something different, and in hindsight, I feel they had to. But season 4, honestly, I was just super happy to go back to Clementine. It was a very interesting angle of the series because although it is a little similar to season 2 in the fact it is about survival, a big element of that game comes down to teaching this kid that's with you, AJ, as well. So I thought that was a different element. Each season almost has a different theme, which was very good. And I thought it was a very good way to tie the series to an end. And it was at this exact point that Telltale went bust, right? So, Telltale, we're all aware of their problems. If we had to rank Supermassive Games, Quantic Dream, and Telltale probably would rank bottom because the owners, in my opinion, would release games too fast, too quickly. And if you do look at the Telltale games, the quality of them do downgrade, I will admit. And I do think Walking Dead Season 4 falls victim to this as well. It was very rushed, and Skybound had to release the last 4 episodes, I believe. So I was just more happy that the game got a conclusion, because there was a period where it looked like we weren't going to get one as Walking Dead fans. So yeah, but yeah, to be honest, not as good as the first 2 seasons, but you know, a nice little tribute to one of my favourite games. So yeah, I was pretty content with it.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about when they were late, I think it was because they were buying the rights for so many other franchises, weren't they? Because obviously they've done Game of Thrones as well, and they did Batman. They were really sort of The Wolf Among Us as well. They were really clearly sort of overworking their staff, and they were trying to do too much at once, I think. But from what I'm hearing, like, I think they might be back in some capacity. There's rumours of a Wolf Among Us series 2, so I'm not sure if that's right.
Yeah, I have heard this, and yeah, I mean, obviously, if we transition on to Wolf Among Us, I believe, in my opinion, and my older brother would say it's his favourite Telltale series. I absolutely love The Wolf Among Us. I think it's a great series. I think I am aware it does have its own comic, I believe. A lot of the other series, such as Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, you're very restricted to you know, the characters, because some of them are alive in the series or the books, so you can't kill them off. Wolf Among Us, I felt, had a lot more liberty and freedom. And from the noir intro to Big B's voice acting to the story of it and how it ties into, you know, our favourite childhood fables, I absolutely thought The Wolf Among Us was brilliant. What did you think of The Wolf Among Us? You played it as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so this was this was first year uni, and at this point, I suppose where you were saying you had Quantic Dream as already sort of in the back of your mind for these games, I was still very much only Telltale. So The Wolf Among Us for me, I think it was, you know, serviceable. I think that it had its own identity. It's sort of same with the whole noir thing. I remember, was it the end of episode 1 where one of the main characters' his head is like found on the steps, and that's when I really took notice of it, because I was like, this is going to be a different game to what I thought it was going to be. I really thought it was just
Yeah.
going to go through the motions of sort of, you know, old fables and fairy tales and stuff. So when I saw that level of violence in it, I was like, okay, like this, you know, this is going to be something different, and it sort of altered my expectations a bit. And obviously there was an ending as well that was very suggestive that sort of one of the characters is actually still alive. So hopefully there will be a series 2. I'll look out for it. But yeah, okay. Well, perhaps we'll transition then away from Telltale for a little while and go into something that we both, which sort of inspired the name of this podcast, a game that we both love in the horror genre, and that's Until Dawn.
Yeah, so yeah, we're on to 2015 here. Until Dawn, it's a game that I knew the title of, but I didn't know what it was. I never took an interest. And my brother told me to play it, and I remember it was, I think, December 2015, actually. I remember completing it on Christmas Day. That's how much I love this game. I would go to say this is my favourite all-time game. It's sad that it's one of those games where it's a massive shame that I'll never be able to play it again for the first time. I believe I showed you the game for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, but I always get a kick out of seeing people play that game for the first time to see what choices they'll make. You can learn a lot about someone with how they play Until Dawn. And yeah, everything in that game is phenomenal to me, from the endless twists to the constant layers and possibilities. They've brought in a load of big actors. Rami Malek, obviously, who's gone on to win awards. Hayden Panettiere. Yeah, terrific cast, I believe. And honestly, it made me almost, I think it was at this point as well, this game Until Dawn made me look at Telltale in a completely different light. Because of Until Dawn and how long they took to make this game and how much effort and intricacy went into this game, I really learned the effect of how choices do matter and how much a game can branch out in comparison to Telltales, where I saw the choice space was choice, but a lot more of an illusion. You notice that a lot of the choices don't actually matter as much as you'd hope. But Until Dawn can change everything. You can have characters die in chapter 4, or they can survive the whole way through and play vital parts. The game chops and changes so much, and that, as well as the psychology sections to really determine what kind of game you're going to have and how it's going to be decorated. I honestly think it's a masterpiece, and I vote it and tip it as my favourite game, and I think it's going to take a lot for that title to be beaten. I really can't see how anyone's going to beat the legacy of Until Dawn, in my opinion. So, what did you think of the game then? Do you hold it in such high regard as I do?
I do. In terms of my all-time favourite game, it probably sits second or third. My first being LA Noire, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, I loved it. I think before you showed me, I saw an article on Facebook. It was like the Gaming Bible, and it caught my attention. I was looking at it, and the fact that obviously the graphics were superb. Even just the premise, the story. You've got sort of these teenagers. It has sort of a very typical American slasher feel to it. You've got a psycho villain, and there's all these sort of likable, dislikable characters are gathered together again after sort of on an anniversary of one of their friends' deaths, or two of their friends' deaths, I should say. And then you've got this big twist that sort of drip-fed throughout the game, but it completely spins on its head. You suddenly realise that there's this complete other threat on the mountain, and that's when the stakes really go up. And that's something I'd say about this game, is that you find yourself on the edge more in your first playthrough, obviously, because you know that there is a real threat out there, and that sort of any mistake and you can find yourself sort of ended up dead.
Definitely, yeah. I think another big horror element of the game, because obviously the game's not perfect. So, for example, some of the jump scares are tacky, and I do think there are some tedious scenes, mostly with Mike in the sanatorium, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say as well, like there's just certain details in this game compared to maybe what they've done with the Dark Pictures, that this being super massive. But Until Dawn, like, how you've got sort of the fixed camera angle where it's sort of stationary, and as you're walking, the camera's following you, and it sort of gives that whole illusion that you're being watched.
Oh yeah, that whole Resident Evil camera. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I remember the original point there that I was gonna point out. Obviously, like a lot of horror game, it's dubbed as a horror game, and a lot of horror comes from the monster or whatever it is. But a big part of the horror from Until Dawn was the fear that your characters would die. So obviously, it builds up this thing where you end up liking these characters, you want them to live. And like you say, any false button or any false dialogue or choice could actually impact any of these characters. And it was so interesting. I think it's one of the first times I've seen a horror game where horror comes from the fear that your characters are going to die.
And the fact there's so many of them as well. There's 8 characters, isn't there?
8 of the main ones, yeah. 8 playable ones, I believe.
Yeah, so every time you're in a scene, it's not like you've got any respite. Maybe again with sort of like the Dark Pictures, there's like 5 characters, so you know that if you sort of make one bad decision, you know that you've still got a good amount of people, but you could sort of make decisions in this. Like, for example, what I did when I played as Chris, and you've got the saws coming down above your head, and I thought that was it, because I didn't know the twist that was coming. I went and shot Ashley, or tried to shoot Ashley, and that decision affected me badly later on. And at the time, I thought I was doing really well. I kept everyone alive. But as soon as I made that decision, that sort of doomed my gameplay in terms of keeping everyone alive from there. So I think it's well done.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
the music as well, like even when you're walking through the woods and it's got it sort of it really sort of makes it atmospheric and really intimidating to the player. So
even from the menu as well, with the totems and the little hints of what's going to happen in the future, and you can see your relationship with the different characters, and it changes throughout the game. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to Until Dawn, and I think Supermassive now have become an absolute powerhouse in the genre. And obviously, as we're going to go forward, we are going to talk about more of their games, because House of Ashes is obviously around the corner. And honestly, I don't know about you, but I'm just excited to see what this game company produces, like, constantly around the corner. I think they're brilliant.
It is, yeah. Like you could argue that they're maybe victims of their own success in terms of stuff going forward, and maybe games that have recently been, because Until Dawn was so good. And there's actually been sort of a criticism that maybe they should scrap that whole idea and go back to what they did with Until Dawn, take 4 or 5 years to develop a game, really flesh out the decision making in it, add loads more clues, add sort of different elements of horror in one game, as opposed to sort of chopping it up and giving episodic games, as it were. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Until Dawn. So we'll just have to see. Hopefully House of Ashes can do something that is reminiscent to that. But yeah, we'll have to see. Right, okay then. So shall we move on to a franchise that you're closely familiar with a little bit more than me, which is Life is Strange?
Yeah, of course. So, this probably came around the same time as Until Dawn, maybe a little earlier than Until Dawn, actually. I believe it was 2015, so this would have been when we were at uni together, and I didn't have a console on me. I had my laptop, and I was so excited. I saw the trailer. I don't know if you ever have this, where you see a random trailer for a game, and you don't know anything about the gameplay, but you're so wrapped up in the world because of the soundtrack and the trailer and the acting and the characters in it that you just decide, I want that game. I'm having that game. Life is Strange was like that for me. I was following it for ages before it came out. I pre-ordered it. My awful laptop could barely run it, but I still had a lot of fun with this game. It obviously tackled subjects which were very close to us at the time, being around a similar age of us, where you're kind of like this young adult, this teen trying to find your way through the world. There's all these other kids, and there's all these stories, but it mixed in this time travel element, so it was really intriguing. But yeah, also the strongest point about the game is perhaps just simply the characters in it. So you play as Max, this girl who comes back to her old childhood town, and you reunite with your old best friend Chloe, who you once abandoned. So and then you develop these superpowers, and there's all these choices in the game. And honestly, everything about this game, it's not perfect like Until Dawn. It has its flaws, but mainly pros. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I think every time I pick up a Life is Strange game, I only listen to like acoustic music for about 2 months afterwards. I really get wrapped up in the world. And the story's completely really emotional as well, and it's got a massive fandom now. I thought the game would take off exceptionally well, and it has done. It's got a massive fan base. What did you think of Life is Strange? At what point did you start playing the game?
Wow, I think this was probably university as well. Maybe as late as second or third year. I'm really not sure. It's probably second year. But I remember I sort of saw it on the Xbox Marketplace. It was out for free for a limited time. I remember sort of you'd mentioned it previously. I knew it was a choice-based game. So I watched the trailer for it, and I saw it was this whole time travel element to it, which I thought was interesting, because obviously, if you sort of, the whole adage of, if you change history, sort of, you don't know, it could be for better or for worse. And obviously there'll be consequences to it. So the premise of it took me in straight away. and I was quite surprised with some of the, as you said, some of the themes that they mentioned. I mean, I know that there's a particular sequence where you can sort of see a student commit suicide on the game, which really surprised me because although the graphics are great, I suppose because it's not grounded in fully realism, a part of me almost expected there not to be serious themes in there, which was the wrong assumption. But at the time, yeah, there was it went beyond my expectations, to be honest, and that's why I went and got the next one, which I think was called Before the Storm, where you played as Max's friend.
Yeah. So you play as Chloe, don't you? So you play as the other girl who, and it's a very interesting perspective because when you play the first one, you come and see your old childhood friend who you pretty much abandoned, and she's very bitter. She had a new best friend who's missing, which is a big plot of the first story. So the second one follows, Chloe and Rachel, her old friend, and, you see their friendship develop and, start. And in the first one, a lot of people are bitter towards Chloe because of how bitter and angry she is, and she can be quite erratic. You play Before the Storm, and in my case, it definitely changes my perspective. You feel a lot more empathy for Chloe. Not for everyone. I know some people who hated her even more will still think, her attitude in season one is still unacceptable and all that. But yeah, it's a lot shorter. But no, I thought it was a brilliant game. Really good to sort of see the other side of Rachel, get Chloe's backstory. It even offered us a little bonus episode, which I'm not sure if you played, where you play as Max again and Chloe as kids.
No, I don't.
With
I
an
don't.
absolute. Oh yeah, maybe we'll cover it in a different podcast. But I think Before the Storm might be 3 episodes long. Maybe it's because I had the deluxe edition. I don't know if it came with that. But yeah, there's a 4th episode where you play as Max and Chloe, and it's an absolute. It's one of those episodes where they don't hold back. You're kids, you're having fun. You and Chloe are being pirates together, and then it hits you with the most absolute brutal conclusion at the end. And yeah, it's one with tears probably, but yeah, no, we'll probably cover that in a different episode. But yeah, no, it's a terrific way to end it. And then that transitions into the second one, obviously. The second Life is Strange 2.
Yeah, see, I've not played this. All I'm aware of is that it's 2 boys and they're sort of heading off to, is it Mexico or something? They're going somewhere.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the first one is completely set in the town of Arcadia Bay, and a -1 scene, I believe, in an art gallery. But yeah, so you play as these 2 boys. What's interesting about it is you play as the older brother who doesn't have the power this time. So it's not time travel, it's more telekinesis, if I remember right. And you play as the older brother and your younger brother has the power. So it's a little bit like Clementine with AJ. There's a whole teaching element in it. So you mold your little brother throughout the game. And the endings are based off of how, his attitude's gone throughout the game and how you've molded it, which I thought was really interesting. So like I say, the first game is completely set in Arcadia Bay. The second game is like a giant road trip. You're never in the same location. You're on the move, on the move, on the move. And I thought it was a very interesting difference. I still like the game, not as strong as the first one. Maybe the downfall of that, I'm way too attached to Max and Chloe. I thought the characters were brilliant, and it's sad to see them go. Although I agree they shouldn't be written to death, so I think it was the correct move. But the bonus of the first game is that you're in this college and there's these kids everywhere that you revisit and you see all these different stories. For example, I'll cherry pick one. There's a girl called Dana who has pregnancy scares and stuff, and you can keep revisiting her every episode and you can see how her story develops. The same with a lot of different characters. In the second one, you have none of that because you're obviously always on the move. So you really have to like the 2 brothers. And in my opinion, I think they're okay. They're not groundbreaking the way Max and Chloe are. So the downfall of this series for me is that you're stuck with these okay characters and you're with them throughout, and there's nothing around you that's really grabbing or continuous, which was a massive strength of the first game. So yeah, obviously I do recommend it. I think it's a great game, but don't expect it to be better than the first one or as good, because I think it is considerably worse.
Oh, okay. I suppose the payoff that you sort of get with Walking Dead, where you sort of have Clementine in every single series, is you've always got that character that you can latch onto. But it sounds like with this one, where you've not got Max or Chloe, although it feels like the same game, there's the same ingredients there. You've got these characters that you don't quite relate to, and maybe the voice acting or the way they're portrayed is just not quite the same anymore. So it falls short in that sense. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I'll
agree. Yeah.
check out.
Yeah, and obviously, so there is Life is Strange 3, which is currently out. I believe the first episode is out, and that's continuing as we speak. I'm yet to play it, but maybe that'll be one we cover in the future, whether we do go through that, whether you decide to get through the second one. So yeah, I
That's
don't know
new to
about
me.
you, what you wanted to talk about next, but we do have, obviously 2019. There is the episodic. I don't know if you wanted to go through Man of Medan onwards.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're sort of entering familiar territory now, or more recent territory at least, with the Dark Pictures anthology. So those that have played it will be aware that it's by Supermassive Games, and this is intended to be an anthology series where you'll be getting shorter horror games which have the ingredients of Until Dawn, but like as I said, they are shorter and therefore more sort of episodic, as it were, where they could condense things in a shorter sort of time frame, but explore different branches of horror more regularly, as opposed to creating a larger game every 5, 6 years or so. So yeah, it starts with Man of Medan, and going into this, I was really excited again because I was aware that it's all the people who made Until Dawn made this game, and finishing it, I was slightly underwhelmed. A good game, a serviceable game. I'd probably give it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Um, but it felt for the runtime, which was about 4 hours, it took too much time for the plot to get going. I remember they were sort of establishing characters, which I thought was good, and which they did in Until Dawn. But the payoff of Until Dawn is you still had 8 or 9 hours of gameplay to see the characters get into dangerous situations. Where with this, it was like a good third of the game was literally just establishing the relationships between the characters, and there wasn't any real jeopardy for for the most part in sort of towards the beginning. So yeah, I liked Man of Medan. I thought some of the choices were interesting, especially one where you can pretty much die right at the end through one of the women if they don't decompress, and Conrad as well. That surprised me that he could die so early on after the pirates come on board. So yeah, but what did you think of it?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I liked that. I agree with a lot of your points as well. So there are a few flaws. For example, I think the game really gets going for me the minute you get onto the bigger ship. I like the element as it's very similar to Until Dawn in the sense that depending on how far you are catching clues, you can work out what's happening on the ship. Or if you blitz through the game without really, picking up any clues, you get to the end and you might actually be completely clueless and you might not actually know what's happened, at all throughout the game. There's a lot of variety in it. Obviously, I think I was a little underwhelmed the same as you because I wasn't exactly expecting another Until Dawn, but off the back of Until Dawn, where it's maybe 10 to 12 hours gameplay, to have a shorter episodic one, and I get they'll be more consistent, and this will be the theme with it being an anthology. So yeah, there are its flaws. Yeah, for example, some of the characters as well I find a bit wooden. For example, Alex, I just don't really, I'm not excited by him. But yeah, the pros of it, obviously the actor who plays Conrad, I can't quite remember the actor's name, but he's a very big face. So it's nice to see that, the game's getting some big actors in. It's always nice that for traction. But also, I think one of the strongest points for me was the theme of the game. I absolutely fell in love with the ghost ship, the being lost at sea. And there's an element in there with these pirates as well. And yeah, like with the variety, yeah, I thought it was a very strong opener for this series. And, obviously we'll pass on to Little Hope in a bit, I'm sure. But I actually felt it's the stronger of the two, in my opinion.
Oh, that's interesting. What I would say about Man of Medan is, and I suppose it sort of harks back to a point I made earlier. You know how I was sort of saying in Little Hope, not Little Hope, Until Dawn, the way the camera work, it made you feel like you was being watched. In
Yeah,
this game, what I think they did very well is because they had this ship where it felt very confined using these narrow corridors. There were some points where you had to walk around walk around the corner, and the camera wouldn't necessarily move with you. So there was always that sort of sense of jeopardy that could be around the corner. It just added to the atmosphere, and you sort of couple that with the odd jump scare or sort of certain noises or characters, being erratic and berserk. It certainly did pay off there. It's just I wish that there was more of it, because it
of
did
course.
take a while. It did take a while to get going, but you
Yeah, of
mentioned
course.
hope, so we might as well address
Yeah,
it.
actually, before we move on to that, one thing I wanted to briefly mention with Man of Medan, one of the flaws which I completely forgot to mention as well, is I don't know about you, but this was when I played it with a bunch of friends doing the movie night mode. I found it very glitchy. Sometimes you pick up clues and the camera wouldn't pan on the clue; it would still stay on the character, and I would just be moving the flashlight, not being able to pan it. There was one really amusing moment we had where there's a dead body in a cubicle which looks at you as you pass it, and it's supposed to vanish on your way back. It didn't vanish for us, so there was this corpse that was still there. It was a very funny moment, but I found Man of Medan could be quite glitchy. Sometimes script would cut out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes there were a few audio issues. But I think they patched up a lot in Little Hope. I found Little Hope a lot less glitchy. In fact, I'm not sure if I did find any glitches with it. So yeah, it had that going for it. But yeah, so Little Hope. So obviously, I'm guessing you thought it was a bit stronger than Man of Medan.
I did in terms of the plot. What I would say is that the thing that goes down for me for Little Hope. I mean, I know that the ending causes some controversy because it's all similar to the ending to Man of Medan, but the one downside to Little Hope is you do feel like you are just walking down a road for the majority of the game, and you are sort of just turning off to various buildings at different points. Having said that, I do appreciate what they were trying to do with the story in terms of having three timelines essentially. The timeline from what I think was the 70s, which is at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
The present, which is obviously the bus crash and everything that happens thereafter, and then also the characters in sort of from the witch trials era. So it was, as I was playing, I remember thinking, how on earth does this all tie together? And I suppose a lot of other people were thinking a similar thing, and they might have felt that the ending was a bit of a cop out in that sense. But I won't go into details on that. But yeah, I'd say for me, because of what they were trying to do in this, it was a stronger game than Man of Medan.
Yeah, no, of course. So, yeah, I think the flaws you mentioned were spot on, and they're the exact ones for me as well. So, one of the biggest ones is the constant walking down the roads. I get at the start, I thought it might be the same as Man of Medan, where But for me, with Man of Medan, the minute you get on the big ship, I think, the action hits and it's a phenomenal game. It picks up a lot. With Little Hope, I thought the pace just constantly stayed flat for big periods. It's not till the very half an hour where a lot of action kicks in my opinion. But yeah, like you say, the ending really bugged me. I do appreciate the twist. However, my opinion is that we've had a very similar twist for episode 1 and episode 2. I felt, let's assume all the other episodes that are coming are going to have not the same, very different endings. I would have hoped that Little Hope would have came later in the series, not after the ending of Man of Medan. So maybe place it episode 4 or 5, because I have a load of concerns before we're about to tackle House of Ashes, and that is that I'm scared it's going to have the exact same ending, and I'm scared this series is going to be a one-trick pony where it relies on the same twist. So, it might be that some of the endings are different, but I strongly would have thought that they should have put Little Hope a lot later in the series if that was the case.
Yeah, that's right. I think from what I'm hearing that it's not gonna be sort of a similar ending. Well, actually, I won't go into details, but for spoilers, but it's not going to be a similar ending. We'll just have to leave it on that. But okay,
Yeah.
well, I suppose, do you want to talk about? I mean, I've not played this game at all. You've told me about it before, but Last Stop.
Yeah. Sorry, could you repeat that, please? Audio just cut out there. Which game?
Last Stop.
Yeah, of course. So, there's only sort of 2 really on my agenda, but, to be honest, I assume with this podcast, there'll be individual episodes perhaps on them. We'll have to see. But Last Stop is brilliant, and it's a game I reckon you would very much enjoy, actually. So, the intro is crazy. You're these 2 kids in London in the 70s or 80s, I believe, and, maybe even 60s actually. And, one of them gets lost in this portal, and then it goes to present day, and 3 very different stories. So the menu is essentially 3 characters all on a London subway on the tube, and you have to pick which ones you want to play as, and then it's all episodic, so you do them in any order, but then you have to go to chapter 2, and then you can do the characters in any order. But they're very different. One is this crazy thing involving magic with a body switch where a man switches bodies with his neighbour and they have to cope with life, going to their jobs where they don't have the skill set for it. It's perhaps the strongest one of the 3 in my opinion. You've got one about this girl who works for some intelligence agency company where you're trying to bust a drug dealer, but you're actually cheating on your husband. There's a bunch of layers that happen in that one. And then there's one where you play as a schoolgirl and you find this weird magic man and you end up kidnapping him actually. So it's how to deal with your, hostage. What I think the strongest element of the game is the fact a lot of these games are usually set in USA. However, Last Stop, it's set in London. It's very British and it's very strong. I'm not sure if it's just something that would appeal for us, but it's really comforting to see a game of our favourite genre set in the UK. So, you've got double-decker buses in the background, you've got all the accents, and it's just really nice to see. It has its flaws, so it's quite a short game, and the choices are even worse than Telltale in the sense they don't matter too much. For example, you can either pick yes, positive, or affirmative for the options. That's an example. So the choices don't matter too much. It's very linear in the sense that you can only walk one path. It's not like, you're walking around a map. So it's very spoon-fed, and it's kind of like a movie where you press buttons alongside it. The gameplay element is quite an illusion. But yeah, it's a very different game, standalone. It was really refreshing, and I'm glad it happened, to be honest. So yeah, that's one of the most recent ones I've played, and recently platinumed as well, actually. Yeah, so is that a game that intrigues you, perhaps? Is that a game that you think you'll have to tackle at one point?
It is, yeah. I mean, in the immediate future, I think it will be House of Ashes.
Of course.
I know we didn't touch on the Sherlock Holmes series, but I know that the Chapter One game's coming out soon. I know that's going to be sort of choice based heavy. Um, so it might sort of come sometime after that, but I'm not sure. It might be PlayStation exclusive. But if I can get it on Xbox, then yeah, I'll definitely give it a go.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. And the final game I've got here, which I played last year, I think it came out maybe 2019, but I played it in 2020 myself, and that's Detroit Become Human. So obviously Fahrenheit Heavy Rain, that's what Quantic Dream did. They had a game in 2013 which I hadn't touched on actually, called Beyond Two Souls, which I forgot to mention. Good game, not as good as the other two. It was a bit of a downgrade in my opinion. But Detroit Become Human came out about 2 years ago, and it's phenomenal. It's got great graphics, great acting, really good stories. If you're obsessed with things like the future and AI getting out of control, it's a brilliant game. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it essentially tackles a bit like Last Stop pre-stories, where you play as three different AIs. One's a police robot, basically working with the humans to capture deviants, which is AIs who get out of hand, who run away, or mistreat their owners or whatever it is for various reasons. It's very much one of those games which paints humans in a bad light again. One of the stories is a servant for a rich man who gets thrown out, and you start the revolution. And one's simply an AI servant who works with a dad who beats her daughter, and you decide to run away with this daughter. And it's you trying to be a mother on the run. So three very different stories, and they all intertwine in this really beautiful way. And it's very interesting to see how the story develops. But yeah, honestly, it's one that I recommend. I believe it's PlayStation exclusive, so that'll be one that I very much am going to force you to play next time we reunite. And I honestly think you're going to love it. It's the same way you saw Heavy Rain. It's a very similar light.
Yeah, I think as well, because I've seen the TV series Westworld, the whole sort of integration of humans and AI. I think it will interest me, and I'm pretty sure this is the game where there was controversy before it came out over sort of scenes of is it domestic violence or child violence or something like that. Um,
Yeah, perhaps there is a strong element of that. So I'm not sure if it is the game that you're on about, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. It's got some very harsh themes in there. But yeah, like you say, Westworld, very similar themes. You're a big fan of Westworld. I think you're going to adore this game. I think it's a masterpiece personally. Probably a top five game, I'd say, for me.
yes, that's so interesting because I mean you've got this sort of affiliation with it was Quantic Dream, right?
Yeah, Quantic Dream. Yeah.
I've only played one of their games, and that's obviously Heavy Rain. And the other two that you've spoke about, Fahrenheit and Detroit Become Human, they sound really good. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
that
don't
must be
want
really exciting for you
to.
actually, because a big part of these games that we're on about are very much the most effective when you play them for the first time. And you've got two absolute gems here which you're yet to dig into. And I'm actually jealous of you. I would love to be in your shoes where you experience these games for the first time. But at the same time, I'd love to see your reaction and, go through what you think when you first play them. So yeah, no, honestly, it's going to be a treat for you.
Oh, good stuff. Well, I mean, I think we've come to an end in terms of our timelines. For everyone listening, we will be back with a talk through for House of Ashes to give a quick sort of rundown of how it's going to work. So anyone that's played the anthology series already will know that the game frequently takes intervals where you sort of talk to the curator and the main game essentially stops. So we're going to be doing podcasts based on the parts previous to those sequences. Um, And in those discussions, we talk about what our expectations are, what our theories are, what we think of the game as a whole. So if that interests you, then certainly listen, because it'll be a good ride.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously with the intervals, we're going to talk about what our predictions are, where we think the story's possibly going to be going, and you all get to see how horribly wrong we are while we talk about these things. And it'll be interesting to look back in hindsight as well, at the end of the game, how wrong we were with our conclusions, or maybe how right we were. I usually like to keep an open mind with these games where I don't predict too much, but it should be interesting to knock around some theories and see how it ends up. But yeah, we've been waiting for this game for quite a while now. It comes out in less than 24 hours for us, and honestly, I can't wait to get stuck in. Like I say, I'm a little fearful that they're going to have the same twist as, that are very similar to Man of Medan and Little Hope. I'm really hoping it does something completely different. So yeah, but I'm just gonna have to wait and see. Game's hanging in the balance, but I'm looking forward to it, to be honest.
All right, man. Good stuff. We will leave it there for episode 1 of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Thank you all for listening.
All right. Thank you very much. Cheers.